Hello, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for joining this webinar on planning for a very different September. My name is Julia Wright and I'm a National Director at the Campaign for Learning. Last week, Campaign for Learning and NCFE published a paper looking at the impact of COVID-19 on post-16 education and employment, with a proposed action plan to address the challenges. I'm delighted to be here today with Michael Lehman from NCFE, our chair for today's session, and our contributors to the paper and speakers, Susan Pember and Mark Corney. We are recording the webinar and we will send you a link to it after. There is a Q&A when Sue and Mark will answer questions. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a questions box where you can type your questions as we go through. Before I hand over to Michael, it would be good to know if you can hear us okay. So if you can please type yes into the questions box now, we can check this. Okay, we've got lots of yeses coming through, so everything seems to be in order. I'm now going to hand over to Michael Lehman, who's going to take us through the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Julia, and welcome everybody. We took a decision a few weeks ago to look very closely at September onwards. Rightly so, the government and the sector as a whole have been very, very focused on the immediate impact posed by school and college closures, disruption to existing programs. But we were very cognizant that the next academic year is very unlikely to follow what any of us would consider a usual pattern, really. So we wanted to put together a paper, and working very closely with the Campaign for Learning, we were able to identify two excellent authors for the paper. Shortly, I'm going to hand over to Susan Pember, who is the Policy Director at HOLEX. And Susan also used to be a senior civil servant as well, so she's obviously got a lot of experience from that world and will have some unique perspective on the workings of the department and the workings between the department and ministers and what things need to be done to prepare for a very, very different September. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Susan, who's going to talk us through her part of the paper. Hi, Susan.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are well and busy. I think probably you are all very busy. And the first thing I need to say is well done, everybody. I am amazed how people have pulled together, whether you're in the government department, whether you're a provider, a member of staff. It's been absolutely amazing what people have done in 5 weeks. And I think on the digital side, I have seen people move into online learning that didn't even have a fortnight to go, an iPad, and now they're teaching on it. It's amazing. But the last 5 weeks have been really about firefighting, and as a sector group, professional body, about 5 weeks ago, we decided there was just 3 things we should be concentrating on, and those are things that we tried to do. And that was about, making students could carry on learning, because that was important, not just to keep them occupied, but also to put them in a good place for September. That whether that was young people, people in school, or adults, we wanted to keep people learning. We also wanted to make our staff feel supported and reduce anxiety levels, because that seemed really incredibly vital for the future, because we already find it difficult to get staff. And therefore, if our staff through this process felt that they were going to be unwaged, that they'd have to go and claim universal credit, it would be a big concern to them. And the last thing that we thought we needed to concentrate on, and there's lots of things around there, but the last thing was to ensure that we had a provider base, because our provider base is quite fragile, whether we're talking about apprenticeships, whether we're talking about adult learning or colleges. To keep our learners come because they're attracted to us. They don't come because they're forced to us. Therefore, it was really important to keep them aware of what was going to be offered in September. And back 5 weeks ago, we produced a sort of list, asks of government. We need you to do this if we are to manage those 3 things of keeping our staff happy, about ensuring a provider base and keeping students in learning. And I'm really pleased to say it might have taken like 4 and a bit weeks, but we got there. That set of asks has been met by DfE, And I'm very, very impressed by how the Minister, Gillian Keegan, has really fronted that and got what we needed, whether it was, you know, no clawback from grant-funded providers, or whether it was like ensuring that young people could do their functional skills and get accredited this summer. All those things are really good. There's one, you know, there's a couple of aspects we'd still like. You know, I still don't understand why the levy apprenticeship provider base isn't seen as part of the government machine for providing apprenticeships. And I'd still like some sort of innovation or emergency fund like they have in the school sector for, you know, deep cleans and moving on in the digital world. However, most of the asks have been done. People are feeling, or I hope beginning to feel, that their funding is assured so they can get on and switch their learning onto online learning. But then that takes us to the next and far more now important issue, is what are we going to be prepared for in September? Now, I'm convinced that the young people, you know, we've all got family members, and I've got a large extended family, and I'm a governor of a secondary school. Those young people come into colleges or other providers in September are not going to be the same. They haven't been in learning since March. They are different types of young people. Those who are going to get their good GCSE results this summer will, you know, swan into their institutions that they're planning to go to, and you know, they will be new, competent youngsters. But there are many out there. You know, normally there's between 30 and 40% who haven't got decent GCSEs. Some of them, many of them, would have wanted to go to work. Where are they going to go? So, you know, it's no good us thinking that we're going to have this big boom, that we're going to, it'll be all fine in September, we'll all bounce back, we'll all go to our workplace, and it will be the same, because it won't. You know, I'm part of, I live very close to Gatwick, so we were aware that the North Terminal was going to close well before it was announced in the paper. And people down here in this area of the country have been made redundant. They haven't been furloughed, some have, but there's many. And I think there was a statistic in the Guardian on the weekend that said Crawley, which is my closest town, is the, you know, the worst affected in the country, and I can see that. Now those employers are already saying, well, actually we now can reflect on our workplace. We don't really need the type of employees that we had in the past. We've now got used to doing digital. We're now used to giving advice and information to, if you take the airport itself, to passengers by digital means, and we don't need people. It will be, I'm convinced, of a different type of workplace. We've also got, you know, 3 million looking towards universal credit, and the figure is 3 million unemployed, and that's without the young person's figure. And also, we've got the issue of, will those furloughed staff actually have a job when they go back in September? So when you think about it that way, and Mark will have the figures in his presentation, when you think of that think of it in that way, we'll have lots of people in September looking to go into training. Adults needing retraining or first skills level training, and young people going into a college or training centres that do not involve the workplace. Now that's hard to say when we've been trying to have bringing an employer-led system for the last 20 years. But in reality, employer-led systems only work when there is when employers are recruiting. When employers don't recruit, then we've got the issue of a system that is quite broken. And that's where we are at this moment of time.
Can I just interrupt a second, please? Yeah. We're getting a lot of questions coming in that people can't hear properly. I'm trying a few things to try and work it out. The only other thing I can work out is, could you try turning your video off, and if people let me know if that improves the sound, if we try just the audio.
Okay, not heard that before, but I'll do that.
The only thing I can think of.
Yeah. Is that better?
So I'm just waiting for a few people to let me know if that's made an improvement. Some people let us know that it. I think it seems to be only some people affected here. Yeah, a lot of people saying that the audio is better without the video.
Okay.
Yes, I think that has improved things. Are you happy to speak without video, Susan?
Yeah, of course I am. Yeah, everybody's seen my face now anyway. If you didn't know it, you know it now. Right? So where I was at, I'll just recap a couple of sentences. That you know, that the new workplace will not be there. The workplace that we know will not be there in September. So where will those young people go? They won't be able to go on an apprenticeship, and they won't be able to get a job. So there'll be more young people looking to ensure that their entitlement to education up to the age of 18 is done within a college setting. They might stay at school, or they'll be looking to some other training facility. So are we there? You know, have we moved? Could we quickly move to a position in September where we've got lots of new places and a new offer? Does this lagged funding system that we use for 16 to 19s actually work? Will it work with you when you? So there's lots. What I'm getting at here, there's lots of questions that need to be answered now. But if the colleges are going to increase their numbers in September, they need that reassurance now. They need to do that planning now. Then we've also got the issue with adults. We've got lots more unemployed adults now. We've got furlough adults already phoning the career service, the helpline, already looking at you know, the prospectuses online and joining online courses. Many of them will need to retrain in September. So in a way, it's brought through the concept of the National Retraining Scheme earlier. There's 600 million in that sitting there for 2021. Maybe we need to bring that forward. But again, those decisions need to be done now. And lastly, we've built up an apprenticeship service, and you know, and it's been, the levy has worked. However, the levy sort of only works, as I was saying, where we've got employers actively recruiting and actively wanting to use the levy within their business model next year. I got a feeling they won't be ready for that. Therefore, you know, what do we do with these adults? Now, our relationship with DWP seems to be working well when it's low unemployment, but we all know from the past that the sort of barriers that DWP can put in the way of new learners, new adult learners, taking a course or doing provision is more difficult. So we need to work with DWP now, not wait till September, not wait till those numbers either increase or are becoming more difficult to find provision for. So but we don't need just one program. We need a range. We need to segment what this market would look like. So we'll need everything from basic skills to quite high level retraining. And again, we will need to do that for September. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, we would have to have everything in place, but we will need to have something in place. And at the moment, the programs that we have are not that fit for purpose. We can't quite just tweak the traineeship so it covers all these young people. We've got gaps now in our infrastructure. We haven't got a whole set of level 2 qualifications like we used to have. They are led by the standards for the apprenticeship world. And if the apprenticeship world hasn't got those standards, then can we actually just continue with the same frameworks we got now? It also means that for classroom-based vocational work, you might not be able to do that work experience in employers' premises, but you can still do that work experience in a sort of practice area, the same as they might do for a skills show. So there's things that we've got to do, but we've got to do them now, and we've got to think about them. And I suppose my writing for this pamphlet was actually to, you know, to nudge, but a bit more than nudge people, nudge DFE, nudge DWP into action now. And really, because we owe it to those students. Those young people have lost out on maybe up to 6 months of learning, which will affect them in their early life. We need to think about a way of replacing that, and we need programs that they're interested in come September. And our adults, this is no fault of our adult worker, and we now need to sort of correct some of the sort of practices that we've had, that, you know, whereby if you're a care worker, you know, you get a real pittance paid for you if you're a care worker apprenticeship for your training. But if you're doing a master's degree, you know, you get the 10 times the equivalent of what the care worker gets. So we need to actually think, you know, how can we improve the system? And as I said, we owe it for those learners. And just a little reminder, it's just 18 weeks till September. So we need to act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, it's really vital, I guess, if we're going to think about a plan for September, that they start planning now, and that the last thing we want is to arrive in September without that plan at all. Thank you very much. Just before I move on, there's a couple of people still experiencing audio problems. I have suggested in the chat there, if the only thing I can think of doing is to change the audio settings. So there's a bar on your right. If you click audio, there's an option to dial in using a mobile phone or a telephone as well. That seems to have helped some people getting better audio as well. A couple of people have also wrote in the comments that they've been using headsets, and when they've literally unplugged them and plugged them back in, that started working as well. So just a few little things to try and get that audio working for everybody. We have got a lot of people on the webinar as well. So thank you very much, Susan. We're going to move on now to Mark Corney, the next author, and Mark has got many years experience as a policy analyst and economist, and I think the work that Mark's done in the paper is to really draw together the evidence, and he's shown a very, very excellent understanding of the relationship between the labour market and jobs and skills and education, and the knock-on effects of everything. So over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you are well, and I hope the microphone issues are resolved and you can hear me. Just by way of introduction, when we were thinking about this paper, speed was of the effort to get it out. So we were not talking about fully referenced papers, and we quickly had to insert some words and work by other organisations, especially the Office for Budget Responsibility and their economic reference scenario. But we probably had the message pretty early on, a plan ready in June for September, and that was the key message. My part of the paper, read it as magnitude rather than exactitude. If it encourages people to think of, well, what are the exact figures, we have time to do that. But we put together some data from various sources with some back of the envelope estimates just to get a feel of what the world might be like in September. I suppose the key message is this is not just about the Department for Education. This is a DFE DWP agenda. And if anything comes of this webinar, and I'm so pleased that so many of you have found time to join, we owe it that both departments work extremely closely together for a plan, especially for our young people who we know are adversely impacted more in relations to any recession than the population generally. This is also not just an FE agenda, it's an HE agenda. And of course, it's an active labour market agenda. Active labour market policies, FE and HE. And we need to bring those together. There are some assumptions in this report. First of all, reasonable worst case scenario, obviously central to the thinking of public health debates. I have not come across it. Many of you will have different experiences, and reasonable worst case scenario may be part of your way of working. But what we have seen is that in the economics profession, they can't do forecasts any longer because history is, certainly recent history, is not a good guide. You have to look way back, probably to the 1920s, to come to a period, what we're experiencing now. So economists are talking about scenarios. So we thought it was very important that given that this is a DFE DWP agenda, joint, that there should be a reasonable worst case scenario approach across post-16 education, and I'll call it welfare planners. And I'll explain that because it's not a great term. Another of our assumptions is that clearly from April all the way through the rest of the year, the post-16 education, but also benefit workforce must be healthy and COVID free. This is not a flippant comment. This is really important. We need lecturers and teachers and trainers and assessors. We need job coaches, work coaches, benefit officers, fit and healthy from now if we are to plan for September. And of course, we've also had to make an assumption about COVID-19. I'm not a medic. I don't think Susan's doctorate is medical either. But we just assumed when putting this paper together that social distancing would continue till the end of June. And to be fair, that's the assumption that the Office of Budget Responsibility too has had to make. We also just assume that social distancing would probably continue all the way through, gradually eased until September, without everything being removed by September. Again, that focus on September because it's so important for the post-16 education and skills system. It's a critical month. Now, reasonable worst case scenarios are scenarios. They may not happen, but we thought it would be very important to see in terms of the economy what we should assume could be the worst case. Now, this is slightly different to what the Office for Budget Responsibility has put out, and a slide has come up. You can see, I think everyone now knows, the fall in output in Q2 is historic. You have to go back to the 1920s, I think, to get anything like it. But there have been challenges to some extent about whether there will be that immediate bounce back at the end of Q2, that the economy will just automatically bounce back. And what we have there is a classic V-shaped recession. I mean, to be fair, it's not a recession because technically it's 2 negative quarters. But the debate is now moving on that actually there are critics indicating that we're not going to be having to face a V-shaped recession, but a U-shaped recession. I should say that on the next slide, there's a whole, the OBR has set out estimates under its own reference scenario for unemployment. It spikes at 10%, but it's still high in Q3 2020, and it remains above 2 million throughout 2021. And that will put a really big question mark of the opportunities, particularly for 16 to 24-year-olds, but also for adults as well. And we could, even under the OBR scenario, be starting with unemployment around 2.9 million by the back end of September. Now, of course, on the next slide, if we move to a U-shaped scenario, which is what we had in mind putting this together, then of course the business outlook and the unemployment outlook could be so much worse. So we just thought that it would be right for Whitehall, the officials in DWP and DFE, to say, well, let's assume that the economy is flat on its back throughout Q3, July, August, September. And that would be a reasonable worst case scenario because that means in September, October, so critical for admissions and recruitment, it would give us some guide. Well, what might September and October really look like? We did not go for a prolonged U-shaped recession where it flatlines or only grows the economy only grows modestly in Q4 because it was too depressing to think about. So we were depressed enough by just saying it would be a narrow U-shaped recession. And we think that that is probably the right way to plan by June, be ready for September. Two quick things on that. And that is that the largest fiscal stimulus, and we've had many rounds of monetary and fiscal measures, is of course wage subsidies, and the biggest of those is the furlough scheme, the coronavirus job retention scheme, extended till June, 50 billion over 4 months. There's already concerns about should that be extended by September. If it ended, there'd be a cliff edge. Unemployment could be far higher. It could be tapered probably towards the end of September, but even so, employers could be in very difficult position again at the start of the new academic year or the month over Q4 October. And that's where we could have another round of job losses. And of course, the young people can be hit hard. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has been trying to suggest that we are into a U-shape, not the V-shaped of the OBR. And if you're into the macroeconomics, the next big event will be by the Monetary Policy Committee on the 7th of May, a Thursday, where they should offer a forecast, and that will give us another outlook for unemployment and the business population. And that's the other thing I wanted to say. I've been having a quick look at the number of employers that are dissolved each year, and figures from a certain group of academics have indicated that if they compare March 2020 with March 2019, there's about 20-odd thousand fewer businesses. So it's reinforcing a point that Sue made. By the time we get to September, there may be just fewer businesses. So if we put it into a specific skills policy, take the UK apprenticeship levy, there could well be few levy payers just in existence come September. On the other hand, probably many that have gone out of business will be smaller ones who are non-levy payers. But that means we could have a lower number of non-levy employers who used to want to recruit, if they could get funding, for apprenticeships. There might be fewer around. So we may well be seeing a debate emerge on how we can help employers across the board to keep labour costs down. So one will be debates about just reducing as far as possible employer national insurance contributions. Another could be looking very carefully at the structure and changes to the national minimum wage. They've been set for this financial year. The Low Pay Commission is undergoing its consultation phase. I think everyone listening to this seminar should make an input because that will set what is required from next April. And that still could be quite difficult if unemployment is averaging over 2 million or more next year. So a key message is that we can't wait for the next fiscal event, which is the autumn, either for a budget, a formal one, or for the spending review. And we know in Whitehall, the autumn can mean anything. It can mean September, October, November, December. I don't think we can wait that long. We will need a plan by the end of June, ready for September. I have detected, but this is odd references to a phrase, recovery plan, a plan for recovery. I'm not seeing It's extensive referencing. I do hope as part of the exit strategy that the Chancellor and the government is planning for recovery, and some of the ideas in the report are there in terms of the post-16 education and labour market system. What I wanted to then emphasise is clearly there are certain groups that are at risk. We have about, looking at the figures, in general, we have a large number of young people in full-time education. And what we might find is full-time education is a very good place to be come September. And those that are at risk could well be 125,000 16 to 17-year-olds who are in jobs without training, jobs with employer-funded training, jobs with part-time education, and of course jobs with apprenticeships. There are about roughly 2.4 million 18 to 24-year-olds who are currently in employment. I think, I could be out a bit, but about 300,000 of those have apprenticeships. There will be some in jobs who are doing part-time further education, part-time higher education. Clearly some of those will be at risk. And we also have to factor in that the cohort of 16 and 17-year-olds is on the up. And my calculations is that there could be around 440,000 or so 18 to 24-year-olds this September who are leaving full-time education and are about to enter the labour market. Now, what's important is they're not all graduates. We tend to focus on those, but there will be a group of 17 and 18-year-olds who don't go on to full-time higher education. They're looking for jobs too. Unemployment is quite low at the moment. It's about 300,000 16 to 24-year-olds. But I think that we could expect that to climb rapidly by September. So here's just a quick drop through of some of the ideas that you might want to consider. Noting, I think that policy might need to pivot. It might need to pivot towards full-time education, traineeships and active labour market policies, away from employer-driven education and skills, but also jobs as well. We probably need to pivot for a year or so. So on 16 and 17-year-olds, I can see a demand for more full-time places. I can see it going up for state 16 to 17 education at schools and sixth form colleges and general FE colleges, probably because parents who have used the private education system can no longer afford the fees for their teenagers 16 to 18. So they might be looking for places in schools and colleges and elsewhere. I expect that apprenticeship number starts could go down for 16 and 17-year-olds, which is shocking given that we simply have fewer and fewer 16 and 17-year-olds on apprenticeships, and I've always been very worried about that particular group. On 18 to 24-year-olds, I think it's really important to look at full-time education. Some of you will have heard that higher education institutes, especially universities, will struggle because of foreign students, especially from Southeast Asia and China, not coming over. And that will put individual institutions under financial pressure. All of that is true. There has been discussion about a cap, but there may be a cap per institution, but we don't want a national cap. And the reason why we wouldn't want a national cap is that we really do want as many 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds to enter full-time higher education if they've got the relevant standards and grades, so they're not competing for jobs in the labour market. And indeed, this is an echo, a point for that Susan made. We now have post-master level income contingent loans. And I think the maximum support you can get is about £11,000. Now, some universities are pricing the taught courses for a year at about £8,000 to pay for the fee. Well, that means there's £3,000 left. That £3,000 can be paid for maintenance. And that is more or less equivalent to what a young person graduating this September might get if they was on universal credit, albeit in the form of a loan. But without the maintenance, they can't do the masters. But graduates know that this is going to be a very difficult labour market this September. So they're looking at postgraduate study. So here's my question, which I hope anyone from the Department for Education could consider, because it's one of the areas that I find very unfair. If I do not have a first level 3, I pay no fees, and I want to be a plumber, and I want to study in a full year to get my level 3 in plumbing, but I get no maintenance. I might get a low bursary, ad hoc from a college, but there's no national system. But then again, if we have a 22-year-old that wants to do a postgraduate degree in geography or politics or international relations, the Treasury just allows the maintenance money to be there. I really do think that this is a time where we can start offering maintenance support so young people can get the skills that they need to compete in the labour market. In terms of apprenticeships, jobs with apprenticeships, maybe we need to be looking at extending wage subsidies to 19 to 24-year-olds to encourage employers to take that group on too. And in terms of those that are unemployed, we are going to have need more work coaches, more programs that require work experience, and also work placements. And this is probably my final 2 points, and that is employers are going to be under considerable pressure, requests for jobs, from work placements, for work experience across the board, not just DFE programs, but DWP programs. And I think there needs to be a coordination, because if you want to launch world-class qualifications this September, and part of that is to have mandatory work placements, it really is important, probably not this September, but from next September, to factor in that the labour market might well be flat, and employers might have to say, no, I must offer a job rather than a work placement. So I think we need to think very, very hard about mandatory work placements and T levels from September 2021. And adults, Susan mentioned a lot more than me on adults. I think that we are now in a situation where adults have to put earning before learning. It's not the cost of fees, although I think one of our proposals is stop co-financing that requires cash, just stop it. What we need to do is make most provision free. Adults and families are going to take a big hit in household income, possibly £300 a month on average this year, and another hit next year. What they need is help with costs. So if their employer doesn't need them for so many hours, they have some maintenance support to top them up. I do hope, and I just want to finally say, DWP and DFE work very well when the economy is trundling along and we've got employment rate of 76.5%. The departments need to work really, really well for the sake of our young people when we're into one of the deepest recessions in living memory. I hope that that's okay, Michael.
That was fantastic, Mark. Thank you very much. Really, really compelling sort of walk through the evidence there. and some really constructive suggestions for policymakers as well going forward. We're going to start taking questions, so if you do want to use the chat and questions box on the right to fire something, we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. Just before I move on to questions, I'm just going to answer a few things. A few people have been asking if they haven't seen a copy of the paper. It is on the NCFE website. You can probably find it by Google, but we will send a link to that alongside the slides and the full recording from this webinar for any colleagues who weren't able to make it, or if you'd like to send that on to any additional colleagues as well. But where to start? I've had there was quite a lot made about, I think it's a really interesting point, Mark, full-time education becoming a really safe haven for that 16 to 18-year-old cohort. Caroline's asked a question about the lagged funding model and the system's ability to cope with such a vast increase in numbers in a single year. Have you got any thoughts about that?
What I would like to do, Michael, and thanks for the question, Caroline, is I think there is a case for a single 16 to 18 participation budget, because what I think is important is the funding of apprenticeships should be funded in the same way from the same pot as full-time education for 16 to 18-year-olds, and then the department can move the money around flexibly, including traineeships, to ensure that every young person is catered for. And we do have, of course, the raising of the participation age to the 18th birthday, but Susan is the best person to explain why lagged funding is probably not the right approach from this September. So can I pass that to you, Susan?
Yeah, fine. I mean, lag system works when you're trying, say you've got 1,000 kids in your sixth form or in your college, and you go up by 10 and they make a promise, or we'll pay you those 10 when they get to the second year. That's fine, you can take that on board. But once you're into like a 25% growth, you can't afford it. You actually haven't got the cash flow to fund your staff or get the equipment or maybe lease new premises. So a lag system only works in a very stable situation. It just doesn't work in a growth situation. And what providers need to know is that if they're going to grow in September, that they are going to have the funds immediately within that month so that they can pay teachers. It's as simple as that. And that's why I think DfE needs to look at this quickly and give those sorts of reassurances to those providers, because the last thing we need is in the press in September, numerous youngsters go into the papers and say, I want to go to school, I want to stay in the sixth form, I want to go to college, but we haven't got any places. So we need to react quite quickly.
Yeah, very much so. We've got a question from Susan, who says she teaches at an FE college as part of a team, and they have health and social care professional qualifications in the team. Where students are not able to go on placement, they can deliver work-based activities. I think that was mentioned earlier on as well. They've got a small ward, other resources that can mimic this, essentially, mimic that care environment where students can take part. Do you think the department would be willing to look at flexibilities around work placements to allow learning to take place in those simulated environments? I
think they have to, because if you can't go in the workplace, but you still need to give the students a good experience. And from my background as a college principal, I'll work, areas where we, run things internally, was as good as going on a workplace, as long as you introduce the right sort of attitude to it, that this isn't an easy thing, this is like identical to what you'd be doing at work. It's the right thing to do at this time. I don't think DfE will be having any option to do this. They are saying that they want to go forward with the new T levels in September that involve being out in the workplace. Well, if there isn't any workplaces, they're going to have to review that. And they're going to have these different types of internal workplace situations. And the one that you were just given by, I think it was Caroline, was it? No, sorry. The one you were just given was a fantastic example. And we need just more of that now.
Yeah. Sharon's got a question, and we talked about adults need to be retrained. What areas do you think that would be in? It's a very broad question, and it's a big part of my job in many ways as well.
Well, if I start on that, I mean, one of the things that I do hope that comes out of this is, like, a couple of months ago, we were calling care workers low skilled, and now we understand they're really highly skilled, and we need them, and we need to invest in them. So one of the things I think that we need to understand going forward is looking at where the jobs are, even before this, before COVID-19 and where we are now. If you looked at where jobs were being created, it was in the care industry, it was in the services industry. And we need to make sure that we put them up on the pedestal as we put engineering, which is like 1%, if I got that right, of the activity we do. So we need to have a different mindset about where our workers are, and then we need to invest in all those workers fairly. So when we try to do this planning of the future, even if we just look back 6 months, we could see that there was still a rise in care industries, in the service industries, and in parts of London it's the media industry. So we need to look really where the jobs are, and not have this sort of retort to the past about us being there's this high old style physical engineering world that we used to live in, because that's not where the jobs were 6 months ago, and I doubt whether that will be the jobs where they be in the future.
Yep, that's really. I think one of the missing pieces of the puzzle for me, and this probably goes all the way back to kind of primary school, really, is that careers advice and guidance right through the system, that lack of independence, and there's a real disconnect between what we see learners turning up at colleges and other institutions wanting to study, and the kind of the disconnect between that and the jobs available in that local area as well. So very interesting there.
Michael, could I add something? Would that be possible?
Of course, Mark, of course, yeah.
Again, it's just me clutching at the odd reference to a plan for recovery or a recovery plan for June, which would obviously be linked to an exit strategy from this awful virus. And clearly, Susan and I have focused on the people part, a policy package in terms of post-16 education and employment, labour market strategies, if you will. I have to say, again, I did listen into the Today programme this morning, and I caught the tail end of debates around, we need to move to a high skill, high waged economy, and the industrial strategy will kick in here, and climate change also, and whatever is agreed in terms of world trade, because COVID-19 may change supply chains and build local, manufacture local, rather than from abroad. And of course, we're still waiting for the trade agreement and relationship with the European Union. So there are some big decisions that would inform the potential direction of the type of jobs that would be created. And I think that when we get through this bit, we will have, and I think this is very important for the post-16 FE sector, but also HE, we will sort out the funding of social care. We will all have to pay more, and social care workers will get paid the same as nurses and doctors, or whatever the equivalent is. And I think that will be a clear growth industry where there are good, well-paid local jobs, as we all live after this virus to be 90 or 100. So I still expect health and social care to be an amazing growth area. We just need to get the funding and pay sorted, I think. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I think we will be looking at a very different labour market at the other side of this. A quick question that I think I'll just answer quickly for Melanie, who's asking about when guidance for calculating grades for existing students will be released by NCFE. Just to let you know, Melanie, we're working very closely with Ofqual. What we want to do is make sure that all awarding organisations take a consistent approach in line with Ofqual guidance around vocational and technical qualifications. So we are essentially waiting for Ofqual to take that firm position, and then we'll be in touch with customers accordingly. So I can only apologise for the delay to that, but we need to make sure that we've got that consistent approach and that we get it right and as fair as we can for those people who are affected by this. Moving on, Stuart's got a question, which is, I mean, it's $1 million question, this one. We currently have numerous programmes for people, apprenticeships, study programmes, traineeships, ESF, AEB, and no doubt new DWP programmes. How do we bring them together to make it all understandable?
Well, can I answer that, Michael? Yeah. Personally, I think we probably have too many bits and bobs of programs, and what we really need is local providers, local assured providers, doing what's right by the learners in front of them in a flexible framework. So, you know, whether you call it for young people, whether we call it a study program or a T level, in young people's minds, it'll be A levels or vocational courses. But what we do need to do is what is right for that locality. And I sometimes think that we try to box things into too many labels. The same goes for the traineeship or the transition year. If you've got a youngster who hasn't got a really good set of GCSEs, they need something that's tailored for them to get them into a job or further learning. They don't need a name to it. What you do need is providers having a whole framework of activity, whether it be qualifications led, whether it be competence-based activity, but to design a program for them. And sometimes I think we lost the fact that it's our teachers and our lecturers who knows what's best for these young people. And then the same goes for adults. I mean, we've got a whole set of quite flexible qualifications, or what we call non-regulated or regulated, and the ACL on the adult funding framework. We don't really need to invent anything more. What we do need is to let providers get on with it. And the same goes for LEPs or the new devolved areas. Instead of inventing something new, just build on what's there, build on the good practice, build on the expertise of the teachers and learners and the heads of service and college principals and college managers who are working with DWP, working with the locality, because they know what is needed. So I've got to the point now, I think after about 30 years, we don't need more labels. We need to just trust the teacher to do what's right for the learner. And I think we'll find it works. The learner will get what they want, a nice qualification that they can go off and get a job with, and the confidence building and all the other sort of soft skills we now talk about a lot about. So that would be my view of the future. Don't create any new stuff, just build on what we've got.
Thank you. And Mark, do you have anything to add there?
Hello. I would just add that the point has been made from the very top. DFE and DWP need to come and work together. That might have to be at the Cabinet Office. I know how difficult it was on the 18 to 21 youth obligation programme, and I think it took the Cabinet Secretary to chair, because the way that DWP views universal credit as expenditure is get people off rather than stay on and get a skill or get the right job. And equally, from a DFE point of view, there's squabbles: who pays the cost of the fees or the provision, who pays the maintenance or benefit. I think we've got to move, it's all money. We move away from those concepts, and I think there's no excuse this time to break down those financial barriers and then we can meet the needs of employers and learners going forward, especially 16 to 24-year-olds. We mustn't let these departmental barriers and different cultures and views about public spending get in the way, because we need to do right by the next generation, who I think are going to find it very tough indeed from September.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Susan. We do have a number of other questions, but I think we're going to have to leave them unanswered for now. I will make a commitment now to work through some of those questions and perhaps speak to Susan and Mark as well. What we'll do is try and put a blog post up on the NCFE website with some of the questions that have been asked and some answers as best as we can answer those. And there's quite a few for NCFE as a whole as well, so we'll work through those after the recording and try and get those answered for you as well. If anybody on the webinar would like to send through any further questions or contact myself or Susan and Mark for further chat about the paper, then we will be sending out an email address with that email as well that you can contact us on for a follow-up conversation. I just want to thank Susan and Mark both for your time today and for all of the hard work that went into writing this paper. And we hope this is the start of a conversation with the sector as a whole and with policymakers to try and get to a position where we've got a stable system going into next year. So thank you very much, everybody, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. I'm supposed to say thank you. Bye-bye. I unmuted it.